Amen. You guys can have a seat. If you're here for the first time, we're so thankful that you've decided to worship with us today. Before we jump in, one of the things, I've just got a quick announcement for us. Coming up in August, in about 5 weeks, August 13th, we're going to be moving to 2 services. Yeah, we're super excited about this for several reasons. The next week, August 20th, all of our college students come back, so about 30 to 40% of our church will be back with us the following week, so it gives us time to get ready for that. But for several reasons, this is a long journey we've been kind of going on and been looking forward to. It provides us with more space for more people, but also it provides us with more opportunity. It gives us more opportunities for more people to jump in and serve. It provides us with more opportunity just for our kids' ministry and first impressions and all sorts of ways that we can really kind of provide more and serve more in different ways. And then the other way that it helps, along with many others actually, is it actually provides more longevity for our volunteers and just with us in general, because our kids ministry, our kids workers, every 3 weeks they're missing a service. And so this will allow our kids workers to come in and be with us every single week and to be able to attend a service with us. And so we're really excited about this. Again, this is in 5 weeks. August 13th, it's going to be 9:20 and 11. So there'll be more information to come with this. But today, we're going to be jumping back into the Psalms. We're in Psalm 3 today. This summer, we're going through the first 8 chapters of the book of Psalms. And we're seeing how the Psalms are a tool that God has given us as a means to pray and sing and to cry out to God in all seasons of life. Psalms 1 and 2 are both foundational psalms. They lay the groundwork for the rest of the psalms. In Psalm 1, we saw the importance of delighting in God and His Word and the blessing of finding full life from the Lord. And then last week in Psalm 2, Mike will help us see the importance of Jesus being the King of our life, which is huge as we move forward in this. When those two things are true, when God is our source of satisfaction, and also when God is the one ruling our life, and when we're submitting to Jesus in all things, when chaos and hardship come, our life is safe and secure in the Lord. And so we've been using this idea of life being like a roller coaster, kind of going through the ups and downs, with thrills and angst and fear and waiting and relief. And what we know to be true of roller coasters is if you're not strapped down, when that thing takes off, you better hold on for your life. And what we've seen is that when our life is deeply connected to Jesus, when we're all in with Jesus, there is blessing that follows. But when we're not all in with Jesus, maybe halfway with Jesus, it's like being halfway strapped into a roller coaster ride, or just not strapped in at all. And 2 weeks ago, I told a story of Cobra's curse and all the different experiences we had as a family waiting in line, riding to ride the ride. Well, at the very end of the night, that same exact night, me and my oldest, we went on another ride called Kumba. And the two of us, we were the only two that could ride the ride because my wife, she's pregnant, so she can't do roller coasters. And the other two, they're not tall enough. And so we had a father-daughter bonding moment, riding just possibly one of the craziest rides in the entire park with the most loops and spins. You flip upside down and you at least 7 times in about a minute and a half. And so, it had just stormed that night, and so the park was pretty empty. We walked up to the front of the line, and we were on the roller coaster within 2 minutes. We get on the ride. They latch us in. We slowly go up to the top. We can see all across the park and the city, and then we take off. Well, what did I do? Well, I held on tight, clenching my face, straining my neck, holding my breath for the full minute and a half. And when I got off the ride, y'all, I just felt dizzy. Like I was just lightheaded. But of course, I wasn't going to tell my daughter, and was ready to go and sit down for a minute, thinking, well, I'm really glad that's over. Well, what did she say? She said, hey, let's do it again. There's no way. Let's keep going. She wanted to do it again and again and again. And so that's what we did. And finally, by the last ride, I found out that if I didn't strain my neck so much and tighten, just hold my breath the entire time and just relax and trust the harness, I wouldn't get off feeling so out of whack and discombobulated when I got off the ride. And the reason I felt so exhausted getting off the roller coaster was because, yes, I was strapped down. But I didn't really trust the harness. I knew I was strapped in, but I was acting as if it was up to me to stay on that roller coaster, and it was exhausting me. And church, our life can be the exact same way. Yes, we may know that we have Jesus, that we're strapped in, so to speak, but yet how easy is it to go through life clenching down tight, straining everything we've got, believing that it's up to us to stay up and in the seat and not fall off the tracks? Like, it's one thing to know that we're strapped in, but it's an entirely different thing to trust the straps. And today in Psalm 3, we see David, the psalmist, on a crazy, spiraling roller coaster. I mean, he's in a very, very low moment in his life, and he's being jerked around, spinning and spiraling upside down, but what we see is a picture of him trusting the straps. Like, his life is not so great in this psalm, but yet his soul is in a trusting rest in the middle of extreme craziness. And if you look at the header of Psalm 3, it says, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. Now, this is one of the 14 Psalms from David that are directly linked to a historical event. And this historical event that can be read back in 2 Samuel 15, when King David is on the run, trying to flee and get away from his son who is trying to kill him. And when you go and read the whole story that starts back in 2 Samuel chapter 13, you find out real quick this isn't just a small little mess. No, this is like top of the line, world-class, dramatic, crazy mess. I mean, if you think you're famous little cuckoo at times, just listen to this. You know, King David, who had recently had an affair with Bathsheba and then had her husband Uriah killed, and then after that, their baby passes away. I mean, all that by itself this is pretty traumatic. And then they had another baby named Solomon, who was one of David's 18 kids of multiple wives. And one of his sons was named Absalom. And David also had a daughter named Tamar and another son named Amnon. Well, tragically, Amnon violated his half-sister Tamar, which made Absalom mad, and so he later killed his brother Amnon. Well, then Absalom, he's got some underlying rage built out because he thinks his dad, King David, was too passive in the whole situation by not killing his son who messed up real bad. And so what did Absalom do? Well, he took it into his own hands and killed Amnon, his half-brother. And then he conspires against his dad, King David, to overtake him as king. And guess what? It seems to be working. So Absalom gets chariots and horses and thousands of people in the city on his side, and King David catches word of this and knows he needs to flee, and so he's on the run, possibly hiding out in caves yet again while they're all searching for him. And this is the backdrop of our psalm. So King David, the writer of this psalm, has his own son turned against him and was trying to have him killed. I mean, if this isn't a sticky, hard situation, life situation, I don't really know what is. I mean, his own son has betrayed him. His own son is conspiring against him, turned on him, and is seeking to have him killed. You see, the backstory to our psalm today is a story of betrayal. And yet in the middle of all of this, we'll see David say, "But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head." We'll see David say, God answered him, God sustained him, and he trusts in the Lord's blessing. Y'all, David is very aware of the messiness of his life, and in the middle of his mess, he cries out to God, showing us our main idea, that God is faithful among betrayal. And we talk about praying the Psalms and the peaks and valleys of life. This is a clear valley for David. Yes, today, it is a heavy day, but don't check out because it's not a hopeless day. No, we're going to see the beauty of trusting the Lord in moments when we really just don't want to trust the Lord. Like, there's a good chance David, the writer for Psalm 3, is hiding out, wondering if he's even going to wake up, wondering if they're going to capture him and kill him. I mean, he doesn't just have his son against him, but he's got a whole host of people that he's king over against him. And this isn't the first time he's been on the run. No, he's already been on the run once, trying to get away from Saul, who was also trying to kill him at the time, and he also turned on him. And here he is, yet again, in the same situation, except this time it's not just Saul, it's not just one person, it's a whole bunch of people and his son. It's his own people against him. I mean, these are the people that King David fought for. These are the people that he won battle after battle for. These are the people that that have celebrated King David and cheered him on. These are the people that he sacrificed and fought for. And here he is with his people turning on him and chasing after him. And look what David says in the first two verses of chapter 3. He says, "O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is now no salvation for him in God. Selah. Again, David has everybody against him. He's been turned on, and he's experiencing number one of 4 points, the agony of betrayal. He said, how many are my foes? I mean, his life is full of enemies that are rising against him. They're not just rising against him physically, but they're also attacking him at his core. And at his soul. They're saying there's no salvation for him in God. It's almost like they're saying he's not even a Christian. It's almost as if there's this underlying belief attacking him, maybe thinking, how can he say that he loves God and yet he didn't execute his son for what he did to his daughter? I mean, maybe they're thinking, can you believe this? Can you believe his passivity? I mean, what type of God-honoring king is this? They're attacking him. They're conspiring against him. They've fully betrayed him in a very low moment of his life when his daughter was violated and when his own son killed his half-brother, his other son. And then he writes that strange word, Selah, which is kind of a fun word. It's a word that's not really translated. It's more of a musical term. It's a term that gives direction towards the music. Remember, the Psalms are to be sung. And it's an indicator to us to stay here for a moment, to think about this, to meditate on this. It's a musical break in the Psalms. It's a musical break that maybe we could say means stop and think about the weight and the depth of this. I mean, can you all imagine this? The agony of your son and your people turning on you, trying to take everything from you. And maybe you're sitting here thinking, yes, I actually can imagine this because this has happened to me. I know this type of pain. I know the pain of betrayal. I know what it's like to have a friend say, you can trust me, I'll be by your side, I'm all in, and then 2 weeks later they're gone. Maybe you know what it's like to have a spouse or a family member turn on you or to lie to you or a friend talk about you behind your back. I mean, just maybe you know the pain of someone smiling to your face and making a promise just to totally ignore it and to disregard it. We could go on and on about this. Broken promises, unmet expectations, unfair expectations, being left out, being ignored, being passed over, or being treated like dirt by those who are closest to you. New City, this is the type of music that is playing in the background of this psalm. And unfortunately, this is the broken world that we live in. This is the painful, broken, real world that weeps in song, that faces betrayal and hurt. And we can try to ignore it and sugarcoat it and act like it's not true or try to toughen up and deal with it. But the agonizing pain of this is that it cuts deep. Like it cuts to the heart. It grates at our soul. New City, this is the deep pain of life. And what happens to us is that those wounds and those deep cuts, like those to our hearts that happen throughout our life, like they scab over. They get calloused. They toughen up. The bleeding seems to stop as if it never happened, but yet the wound is still there. And every time it gets pricked, and every time it gets poked in that same spot, it bleeds again. I mean, somehow we can get scraped and bumped anywhere else, and it doesn't seem to bleed, but that wound, when it keeps getting bumped into, it keeps bleeding. And often those moments of irritation or sadness or annoyance or loneliness, they're often touching on a much deeper hurt that hasn't been healed. Yes, it's scabbed over, but not healed. And this is why we say things like hurt people hurt people. And this is how and why what it looks like, what looks like pride is often just a cover-up for pain and insecurity. I mean, bullies don't become bullies for no reason. No, it often comes out of a place of hurt and pain. And we experience things like betrayal in these low, dark moments of our life, in the deep pain caves, those valleys of life. We must know that it's okay to feel pain and sadness, to feel the pain of bitterness. But we must also know that our God is both a protector and a medic, and that he wants to meet us in those pain caves. And I think it's fair to say that prior to this moment, when David is running from Absalom, his son, he's been in several of these dark caves before. Again, David was in a dark pain cave when Saul turned on him, and he had to run and hide for his life in literal caves. I I mean, David went into a deep, painful valley when his family was captured and they wanted to stone David to death. And the Bible says he wept bitterly when this happened. David grieved when he lost his best friend Jonathan in the battle to the Philistines. David knew the massive mistake he had made when he had an affair and had a soldier killed. David knew the depths and heartaches of shame and guilt. He knew the pain of parenting and the anger of having his daughter violated and deeply wronged, and now his son and his people, again, were turning on him and trying to kill him. And this psalm was written in the middle of a painful, yet a very familiar place for King David. So yes, King David, he'd won many great battles. He defeated the great Goliath. He was crowned king over many lands. He had great successes to celebrate. He was praised for many things. He had been given a covenant and a promise directly from God himself. And so yes, he had many mountaintop moments, but these valleys, these were painfully familiar for David. And what did David know and learn from all of his past experiences? Well, he knew, and he was deeply aware that he needed help from the Lord. He knew he needed the Lord's strength, which is why he said in verse 3 and 4, "But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill, Selah." So the music was playing, and David is leading us to think and meditate on the agony of betrayal. But then he says, "But you, O Lord." I mean, notice in verse 1 and 2, everything is focused on David. He said in verse 1 and 2, "How many are my foes? They're rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him," meaning David. I mean, everything in verses 1 and 2 is focused on David's trial, on everything around him, his enemies, his worries, his soul. And then in verse 3, he takes his eyes off of himself and he looks to the Lord and he says, "But you, O Lord." And he fights the pain of his betrayal with the truth of who God is. He says about God, he's his shield, his glory. He lifts up his head. David cries out to God, and he answered him. So he took off his eyes off of himself and his circumstances, and he placed his eyes on the glory of the Lord. He took his eyes off of his shaking surroundings, and he placed his eyes on the firm foundation of his faith in the Lord. Showing us, number 2, divine faith among betrayal. Again, David was in this pain cave. He was back in this pain cave of betrayal, but he knew that he needed the Lord. He knew he needed to look to God and not to himself. And he was trusting in the Lord's protection over his life. And he said, "You are my shield about me." So when David, he had a literal army of people chasing after him, and yet he said, "You are my shield. You, Lord, are the lifter of my head." He could have been down in the dumps, discouraged, beat down, fearful. In fact, I bet he was. And that's likely where he was until he took his eyes off of himself and he put them onto the Lord. I mean, David knew he was strapped into the roller coaster, so to speak. But this is the moment when he trusts the straps and he loosens his grips and he takes a deep breath and says, "Lord, this is in your hands. Like, I'm going to choose to trust you right now." You know, we saw a few weeks ago in Ephesians chapter 6, Paul mentioned the shield of faith as part of the armor of God. And I wouldn't be surprised if Paul had Psalm 3 on his mind when David said the Lord was his shield, which goes back even further, all the way back to Genesis 15, when God made a promise to Abraham in Genesis 15 that he would give him land and would put people under him. And when Abram looked at the land and the people and the task, it just seemed laughable to Abraham. And he was likely wondering how in the world God was going to fulfill this promise with all of these people and against all of these armies. And God said to him, "Fear not, I am your shield." And what did God do? He protected him. He kept his word. And so David here was trusting in the Lord, not based on mere wishful thinking, but he was trusting him on his past faithfulness. David knew God as a protector and a shield, and so David was trusting in the faithfulness of God. And you know, at New City, we can learn from this. When your friend stabs you in the back, or when you're in a world of pain and sadness that is all around you, and when you're in that deep pain cave, we can cry out to God in faith and say, "God, lift up my head." when we feel like the whole world is against us, or when we're fearful of what's ahead, we can say, God, protect me. We can say, God, be my shield, because New City, this is our God. I mean, when we look around at our life and think, what am I doing? Like, I don't like my life. When we start to spiral with our thoughts, we have to take our eyes off of us and cry out as David cries out and say, but you, O Lord, lift up my head. But you, O Lord, you are my shield, my strength, and my protection. I mean, church, the moment our joy and happiness and peace become dependent on the things around us is the moment we've said, God, you're not the king of my life. No, something else is. And this is not me pointing fingers at you as if this never happens to me. No, this is me knowing what I struggle with and having to preach this to myself. Y'all, we all go through these moments and seasons like this where we all get on the roller coaster of life when we're strapped in, our face is tense, we're holding our breath, and when the roller coaster stops, we're all out of whack and we wonder, why am I so fatigued and worn out? It's because in the stress of the roller coaster, that is life, we're holding on for our life like it's up to us. And why? Well, because we're human. You know, I don't know if you've ever tried to float. Hang with me here. Or try to teach anybody to float. You know, I'm not the greatest at floating myself, but sometimes I can do it out in the ocean. I mostly sink in the pool. You know, last year I was trying to teach all of my kids to float out in the bay, and one of them was just seriously struggling. She was holding on tight for her life. She wouldn't let go of me, just absolutely terrified. Just latched on to me like a leech around my neck. Again, I'm not a professional floater, but I do know that when you're super tense, you're not going to float. No, you're going to sink straight to the bottom like a rock. And the only way to float is to straighten out your body and relax and let the water hold you up. You have to trust the water to hold you up. And when I was teaching them starting out, I would take 2 fingers and kind of place it on the lower part of their back to help them float and kind of coach them through the process, talking to them. And then once they were fully relaxed, I would kind of move my hand and they'd float. Sometimes not, you know. And if they didn't, I'd put my hand right back so they wouldn't sink to the bottom, and then we'd try again and again, and eventually they all floated at some point. In New City, the same is true for our faith. When we trust the Lord in faith to hold us up like the water, our souls can find rest. We can be at rest in the Lord. But when we're not trusting the Lord or struggle just because we're human and we tense up and begin to sink, we start flailing our arms, waving for help like we're drowning. And here in verse 3 and 4, David is choosing to trust the Lord even when it's hard. And he says, but you, O Lord, are my shield. But you, O Lord, are the lifter of my head. And church, this is why we need each other. This is why we need our community. This is why we need to be in the Word and in groups and finding times in our day to take our eyes off of you and say, but you, O Lord. And when we refix our gaze upon the goodness and the kindness and the steadfast love of God, even when we're struggling to believe it, it is so good for our hearts and souls. But in those moments, when we're struggling to trust the Lord and to believe in His goodness, sometimes we just need people in our life to hold our back when we're trying to float. We need people in our life to just place their hand gently on our back and help us let the water hold us up. And we start to sink again because, again, we're human. That's when our community comes right back and says, I'll hold you up. I'll stand here as long as you need while you grow to trust the Lord yet again. New City, this is church. This is what our community does. We hold each other up. No, we can't fully hold each other up. That's not our purpose, but we can surely give a small nudge of help in those hard moments of life. We need people around us when our faith is failing to help hold us up, to help us trust the Lord, to place 2 fingers on our back to help us float. We need people around us to bring us back to the Lord when our eyes are looking elsewhere for hope and protection. And so when we come back to the Lord again, after He knows our eyes have been looking for protection elsewhere, guess what? He does not shame us. God does not heap on guilt and condemnation. No, He says, I'm so glad you're here. He says, come and sit at my table. He says, delight in my presence. He says, I love you. He says, I'm so proud of you. New City, this is the steadfast love of God. This is the gospel. We regularly and consistently look away from God. We look away from Jesus and the cross, and God knows it and God sees it. And yet, because of Jesus, he says to us, I see your fear and worry. I see your bitter weeping. I see your sadness. And he says, but you can rest at my table. You can cry here. You can lament here. And while you're here in time, he says, I will restore you again. And church, this is not a one-time thing. This is a daily, moment-by-moment thing. This is the goodness of the gospel. There is peace to be found in Jesus. There is peace and serenity that allows us to rest, that keeps us floating. And this is exactly what David found with the Lord. While his betrayers were pursuing him, look what he says in verses 5 and 6. David wrote, I laid down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around me. All around. So David, in his flesh, was fearful to go to sleep. He was afraid of his life, but yet with his eyes focused on the Lord, trusting in his protection, he found peace, and he laid his head down and he went to sleep. He declared to himself that he would not fear the thousands of people that were against him. No, he was at peace in the Lord. David was declaring out loud the faith that he would believe in the moment and in the future. He was trusting in the Lord and not himself, and he found peace, which leads us to point number 3, divine peace among betrayal. You know, the peace that David found is the same peace that we have available to us today. The peace that David found while he was on the run from an army that helped him to sleep at night is a peace that, truthfully, we have even greater access to. David's peace was found in a future promise that God made to him that he could not see. Where our peace is found through a past historical event that sent Jesus to the cross to die. Securing our peace that we can find through the Spirit of God. And part of God's gift to us at the cross through his Spirit is peace. You know, God is not a God of bitterness and fear. No, God is a God of peace. Our God is not a God of worry and anxiety. No, our God is a God of peace. Our God is not a God that puts us on the roller coaster of life, strapped down and secured by the love of God, and then sees us tense, holding our breath, wondering, are we going to make it, not trusting the straps, and then just sit there and not help us. No, our God looks at us and says, rest. He says, be still and know that I am God. When people betray us or attack us or make schemes and plans against us, God's not shocked by that. No, we live in a broken world. We live in a world full of sin. In fact, even Jesus was betrayed. Jesus was attacked. He had plans and schemes made against him. He was sold off by one of his disciples. He was sent to the cross knowing the agony of the cross, and yet in the midst of his agony and betrayal, Jesus was at peace. And why? How? Because his comfort was not found in his surroundings, which was a bloody cross. It was found in a loving Father that loved him and was watching over him while he was being crucified. Jesus at the cross did not live in fear, but he trusted in the love of God. The Bible says in 1 John 1:14 that there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. And so the way in which we fight against fear and debilitating anxiety and worry is by trusting in a greater love, which is exactly what Jesus did at the cross. Rather than looking to the pain of the cross, he fixed his gaze upon the love of God that had great plans to use his death for us to be resurrected into life. Jesus' betrayal led to resurrection life. Jesus' shame led to our newness. Jesus' attack led to our peace. Church, this is the gospel that we celebrate. Jesus calls us to follow him and to be like him. And in following Jesus, there will be pain and suffering, but God uses that pain to bring greater life. And I don't know how or when or why. And I don't even know if it'll be in this life. And I don't know what struggles you're going through right now, but I know this. We serve a resurrected King that wants to bring newness and revival and life into your heart and soul. Listen, if you're just downcast today, if you're sad or lonely or overwhelmed, I want to call you to trust that God will just meet you there. And he will not rush you along. No, he'll stay with you. He'll weep with you. And while he's there with you, he will slowly heal your wounds. And he will resurrect your life. And he will begin to use your current pain and sorrow for something good. Because, church, that is what God does. He takes chaos and brings peace. He makes beauty from ashes, and he also resurrects dead hearts and souls. Listen, following Jesus does not leave us in pity. No, it leaves us with hope. It leaves us with resurrection hope that leads us to sing and shout as David did in verse 7 and 8. This is what it says. Arise, O Lord. Save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be on your people, Selah. Church, this is what God does. He brings salvation and redemption into our broken spaces. And yes, God absolutely saves us from the torment of eternal suffering through trusting in the cross of Jesus Christ, through trusting in Jesus. But may we not forget, he also saves us from the torment of the enemy in the present life. No, it's not completely gone because yes, this life is war. But the Lord gives us strength in this life by his Spirit to make it through our days. Leading us to number 4, divine strength among betrayal. You know, New City, for whatever reason, the story of our church has been God bringing people into our church, people in maybe low or hard seasons, and then slowly over time, God brings healing. And God brings revival into their heart and soul, and then just strengthens them. And then sends them back out into the world and into our community in the Lord's strength. And I'm not really sure what God's going to do in the moments and the years ahead with our church, but what I'm praying for, honestly, is just a lot of the same. That we would continue to be a hospital for broken people who are wounded and wandering and weary, to see people revived and restored and renewed and sent back out into the mission of God, flourishing with divine strength. Because again, this is exactly what our God does. God brings healing and strength to those who are downcast and discouraged, and he slowly shows them their purpose, feeding their passion, and he allows them to see how God can turn beauty from ashes. Y'all, this is what we want to see God do over and over and over again. I mean, for thousands of years, God has been restoring people that have been betrayed and seeing them learn to trust again. For centuries, God has been seeing those who have been attacked and see them offer forgiveness again and again and again. New City, this is the roller coaster of life. And y'all, it is a wild and crazy life. But the gospel of grace keeps us secure. And this gospel is full of mercy that allows us to find rest with full peace. This is the gospel that shows resurrecting life and that resurrects us into new strength. And as we end our time today, again, I don't know how you came in today. But my hope and prayer is that you would leave here with hope and strength. That you would be full of courage to just get back on the roller coaster again. To keep riding the ride of life with joy and peace. My hope is that you would lay back in the water and try to float yet again. Just resting in the strength of the Lord. And this is not to hope in yourself or to hope in better circumstances, but to hope in the goodness of God. To hope, to have hope to endure and to hope to rest in Jesus in the middle of chaos. And maybe you're thinking to yourself, that sounds great, but I just don't have the strength to hope again. Like I don't even have the energy to even try again. And that's what I want to plead with you, to cry out to the Lord and let the people around you, let the people in our church place their hand on your back and just let them hold you up. Church, we need each other. And just maybe today, God is calling you to just be the one that is sitting there, placing your hand on a brother or sister's back and say, I'm here. I'm with you. I'll hold you up. And why would you do that? Because you know what it feels like. You know what it's like to have to be held up. You've been there before. And we talk about praying the Psalms today. Our prayer is that we would be able to simply say that our soul is at rest in Jesus. That Jesus would sustain us and be our shield. And then God would lift our head and say, we're blessed and happy in the Lord. and say to the Lord, yes, I may have been betrayed. I may not love the circumstances of my life. It may seem like everything is against me and I'm not real happy about what is happening. But you, God, you're faithful in the midst of all of us. And I'm going to choose right now to trust you and to let you be my shield. Church, this is the goodness of God. May we trust him today. Let's pray. God, wherever we come in today, whether we're the ones that need to be held up, or whether we're the ones that you're calling to just hold up a brother or sister, God, would you strengthen us today? Would you remind us of the goodness of God in the gospel? Would you remind us that, God, you're with us, that you're beside us? God, wherever we are, would we just sit and would we just rest in the Lord today? And would you just lift our souls, lift our hearts, lift our spirits, and just be able to say, God, I trust you again. Lord, I love you. We love you. We ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen.